The live-action Avatar The Last Airbender series for Netflix has a problem. No, I'm not going to delay and build up to it. I'm going to tell you right now what the problem is. The writers are afraid to bother their viewers. And I don't mean to say they're afraid to show you something intense or terrifying. I'm sure they're hoping their CG renderings of Ko, the face stealer, will upset audiences, and rightfully so. No, I mean the writers are afraid that if they bother their audience by showing them something that might upset their sensibilities, they might stop watching. And this is getting to the point where they're flattening the narrative to make it easier to consume. So what do I mean by that? Well, that requires a deeper dive into the changes that showrunner Albert Kim is making to Avatar, as well as how these changes reflect a greater shift in the live-action series' focus that could spell doom for the whole series. And more importantly, how this greater shift reflects an even larger trend, one that you can see reflected in other Netflix adaptations of popular properties. I don't think I need to explain the plot of Avatar The Last Airbender. If you've clicked on this, I've assumed you at least have a basic concept of the plot, right? According to showrunner Albert Kim,
that was a conscious decision to show people that this is not the animated series. We had to sometimes unravel storylines and remix them in a new way to make sense for a serialized drama. So I'm very curious to see what will happen in terms of reaction to that.
And oh, did they see the reaction firsthand when these news tidbits dropped. First was the removal of Sokka's sexism. According to Katara's actress, Kya Won-teo,
I feel like we also took out the element of how sexist Sokka was. I feel like there were a lot of moments in the original show that were iffy.
Shortly after this revelation, we learned that the series would be cutting out all the filler. No longer would Aang be deviating off course and exploring those pesky side missions. No. From day one, he's focused on the singular mission. Become the Avatar, stop the Fire Nation, save the world. He's taking his responsibilities seriously as the Avatar. All that filler, cut out. Just tight, intense plot, like the later books in the series. But don't worry, they're going to cut the filler out, but we're going to get to see the air nomads die horribly. Aang's actor Gordon Cormier said,
I think the Airbender genocide is really cool. Well, no, not like that. It's not a good thing, but watching it is going to be sick.
He is, of course, referring to the spectacular effects that would be incorporated into the scene, which again, valid. It'll probably be a cool-looking effect. So let's break this down. They want the series to reflect, in tone, the later, more action-oriented arcs, skipping over elements from the introductory arc. The writers are going to tone down the character flaws because they're iffy, as well as any elements of the characters that don't act in immediate service of the greater plot. The focus is on plot and spectacle. That's why unpleasant stuff like the face stealer isn't going anywhere, because it's spectacular. But anything that could potentially, even remotely, make people not adore the main cast, well, that's got to go. Now look, I'm not here to make fun of what these actors are saying. They're clearly excited to portray some beloved characters in a big-budget spectacle, and they're also promoting a series. My criticisms are entirely focused on the creative direction Avatar, and in turn Netflix, have been taking. I'm not going to criticize these kids. Now, if you like what I do here, take the time to like and subscribe, and if you make it to the end, please leave a comment sharing what you think. It helps the channel out a lot. Or, if you think I'm a tourist, you can dislike the video too. That's cool too, I guess. In order to break down why these decisions are awful, we need to figure out the point of Avatar's first book. The goal here is to introduce our characters and the world. We meet Aang, who is the world's sole hope against the Fire Nation. He is the last airbender and the Avatar, but he's also a goofy kid who wants to have fun. He doesn't want the responsibilities being thrust upon him. We have Katara and Sokka, two siblings who want to be great but are held back by personal conflicts and a lack of experience. And we have Zuko, a boy who, thanks to a life of horrendous pressure and trauma, has cemented his entire value as a person on completing one mission. The conflict Aang has to overcome in the first book is accepting the responsibility of being the Avatar, overcoming his childish nature in some respects, while Sokka's inner conflict is overcoming his preconceived prejudices and attitude in order to become a warrior. We see this most notably with the Kyoshi warriors. Now, by contrast, Katara wants to essentially liberate the Water Tribe and help Aang fulfill his destiny. while Zuko wants to serve the Fire Nation, or maybe his own pride. Both of these are more directly tied in to the central conflict of the series. Aang and Sokka's conflicts are separate. Immaturity and pride. These lead to confronting the main plot, but they're not directly tied into it. All of these conflicts are vital, though, because it presents character growth. The characters at the start of the story are not capable of resolving the story's conflicts. They have to grow. Part of what makes Avatar such a satisfying narrative is that the characters are dynamic. They have flaws that they need to overcome. They'll never truly lose in order to be prepared for the endgame. Aang never loses his childlike nature, but he learns to balance it with the needs of the world around him. It becomes a selfless childishness rather than a self-centered childishness. In this show, we lose that. Sokka no longer needs to lose his preconceived notions, while Aang is already selfless. The only thing they need to become heroes that can save the world is more power and skill. They don't need to grow as people, just in power level. So why would the showrunners remove both these elements? Well, it's impossible to say for sure, other than that they think that any character expressing a negative character trait is iffy. But from that comment, we can glean a lot. The crew can talk about the morality of removing a character flaw all they want, but what they want is to streamline the story. They want to remove anything that might keep you from watching, either because you might be possibly offended, or because you might lose interest. The binge model of Netflix requires you to keep focused. Every episode needs to directly move the plot along. Gone are the days of the original series of Avatar where each episode needed to be self-contained in case you caught it out of context on TV. Yes, they gradually built to the core narrative and the greater plot, but each episode could be enjoyed on its own. No, everything now needs to service the plot so we can get to the next thing fans of the original will recognize, even if that means jumping ahead a little bit. This means cutting through some introductory elements so we can get to Azula faster, or integrate Ozai into the plot faster. Two elements that played a major role in the later two books, but not really the first. Yes, they're there, but they're not really there. This is why spectacle is being prioritized, because spectacle grabs your attention. If the elements of the plot that build to later moments are skipped, they're replaced by something cool to look at. The reason Sokka's sexism or Aang's distractions are being removed aren't because they're offensive, but because exploring these on screen might result in the audience losing interest. Every component is designed to keep you watching, but not necessarily to make a powerful narrative. And we can tell this is true because this isn't the first time Netflix has done something like this. Shadow and Bone is an adaptation of Leigh Bardugo's extremely popular Grishaverse novels. The series on the surface should be an adaptation of the first trilogy of books, the Shadow and Bone trilogy. But bizarrely, the showrunners decided to cross the characters and some plot points from the extremely popular secondary series Six of Crows into the mix. In doing so, they created a bizarre cocktail of a plot that sometimes worked. Kinda. Barely. The first season of Shadow and Bone, I think, roughly works, but the second season is where you really see the cracks in the formula. It rushes over the last two books of the Shadow and Bone trilogy while also crossing in plot points from across the Six of Crows duology, where they would not have fit otherwise. They were not present in that trilogy. This results in a plot that's always in motion, even if it sacrifices all of the smaller character moments from the books to do so. And these character moments are really good from the books. If you haven't read these books, especially Six of Crows, I highly recommend you read them. The plot beats that remain in the series are the ones that directly service the now breakneck conflict. The bizarre part here is that Shadow and Bone is a far more meandering trilogy than even Avatar The Last Airbender as a series is. The central protagonist, Alina, is a pretty passive protagonist for the first two books, before really taking an active role in the third book. There are moments of activity, but a lot of it is spent waiting for things around them to occur, biding their time, planning. Most of her arc in the second book is completely omitted to speed the plot along. One of these is, for example, is the search for power, the desire to become stronger. That is glossed over in Shadow and Bone, the series. Her need, her self-reflection, her tentativeness, all that is ignored so that she can stop the big bad quicker. Now, mind you, that's not even getting into the bonkers mishandling that the crows get. I can absolutely get into a whole video about that later. Let me know if you want me to talk about the Six of Crows. I really can talk about that for like 2 hours straight. But for the sake of discussion, I'll just say this. If Sokka's sexism is a bit iffy, I fear what people would say about multiple child prostitutes / assassins, a sadistic crime lord who rips out people's eyeballs, a gambling addict, and basically a fantasy Nazi being the protagonists of your story. Yeah, Six of Crows is wild. I love that. Shadow and Bone ultimately got cancelled by Netflix after 2 seasons, despite being really popular. It wasn't Stranger Things popular, but it had its audience who wanted to see the story progress. This is because Netflix, if you even deviate a little bit from their formula, if you even underperform slightly by their expectations, they will cancel you. Their model needs you to keep watching, and as many people as possible need to continue to watch. That is why Avatar The Last Airbender on Netflix is going to fail. Because frankly, it has no choice but to fail. It is created entirely to service Netflix model, which is increasingly competitive to an absurd level. There is little room for artistic risk or internal conflict when you need to create a visual spectacle that's going to cost a lot of money and better give Netflix a return on their investment. I have no doubt the showrunner is so concerned about offending or boring his audience that he's annexing these aspects to appease the Netflix hierarchy. It's genuinely disappointing to see this, because it's these unnecessary bits that give Avatar so much power as a narrative. That is what makes Avatar such a compelling piece of fantasy fiction. Oh god, I hope the Gundam movie that Netflix is putting out isn't dead on arrival.